and then you do training, particularly in the city, I'll call them licensing departments, whether it's zoning, buildings, housing will be impacted by it, planning certainly, and you pick the people to run those agencies and the deputies that are pledging allegiance to the new world order and good governance.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. Before we begin this interview with my longtime friend Donald Jeffries, just a quick word from our interview sponsor, but first, good news. Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri has announced a bill empowering Americans to sue big tech companies acting in bad faith. Guys, this is breaking news, June 17th, 2020. Today, U.S. Senator Josh Hawley introduced a bill to empower Americans to sue tech companies who act in bad faith by selectively censoring political speech and hiding content. Senator Hawley's bill would prohibit big tech companies from receiving Section 230 immunity unless they update their terms of service to promise to operate in good faith and pay a $5,000 fine or actual damages if higher, and believe me, they would be higher for most of us, plus attorney's fees if they violate that promise. It's a glimmer of hope. We're going to keep our eye on this story. And now a special thanks to our patrons who are filling the gap since we've been demonetized, and this interview's sponsor. Get this, guys. During a recent vote, the U.S. Senate has agreed to give law enforcement agencies access to web browsing history data without needing to obtain a warrant first. To me, that's a lot like tapping your phone. According to Senator Ron Whedon, who opposed the bill, getting access to somebody's web browsing history is almost like spying on their thoughts. This level of surveillance absolutely ought to require a warrant. But that's not what we get in a time of tyranny. So it's now more essential than ever to browse the web using a VPN or virtual private network. And the one I choose is Virtual Shield because it's fast, easy, and has a plug-and-play 30-day free trial. Here, let me show you how easy it is to protect yourself. You go to virtualshield.com or the app on the Google Play Store, download the Virtual Shield free 30-day trial, install it, and click Connect. See, once I'm connected, my IP address is now one coming from Chicago, Illinois, and I don't live anywhere near Chicago. Now, due to the recent economic lockdown, Virtual Shield wants to offer 50% off all VPN plans and all premium add-ons, including Protection Plus, residential access, and VIP performance plans for as low as a cup of coffee. Sign up today for a free 30-day trial to Virtual Shield VPN and see what the hype's about. You have nothing to lose. I'll leave the link below this interview. Guys, it's wonderful to have back on the line our good friend Donald Jeffries. You know Donald, he's an author. He's been on the show many times. I got to tell you, his must-read book, if you guys want to wake up friends, neighbors, and colleagues, check out Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics, and his latest, Bullyocracy, how the social hierarchy enables bullies to rule schools, workplaces, and society at large. And boy, isn't that the case. The bullies running cities now. Donald, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. It's great to be back with you, Sean. Always a pleasure.
Well, it's great to have you back, and I've got a soundbite I want to play for you in just a few minutes. But first, it's all related. Your latest over there at LouRockwell.com. Do you mind if I read the first paragraph or two? It's spot on.
Please do.
Guys, Donald writes, up until recently, the unprecedented events of 2020 have conjured up visions of George Orwell's 1984. As the madness spreads with no responsible leadership in sight, I'm reminded more of a Lord of the Flies scenario. Protesters, almost certainly organized and funded by someone or something nefarious, have taken over 6 blocks in Seattle, Washington. There was no opposition to them doing so. In fact, police there quickly abandoned their precinct. Could anyone imagine this happening even a decade ago? You know, I watched live as the Minneapolis police abandoned their precinct on the night of riots in Minneapolis, as that Democrat mayor told the police to do so based on credible threats. Credible threats. They abandoned the police precinct. I'm with you, Donald. We'd never imagined this 10 years ago.
No, and I think what we're seeing is finally, what people like me have been talking about for a very long time, and fortunately now I have a little bit of an audience to rant to. Before it was just family gatherings and parties, but this is the thing. I've been doing this for many decades even, and I have been talking about, and a lot of us talking about the alarming, the terrible quality of leadership that we have at all levels. And most people don't realize how bad these mayors are, the Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, people like that nobody really knew about. But in a crisis like this, they all come out first in the COVID, the pandemic, or whatever you want to call it. First of all, that, And now this, where protests are all over the country, you're seeing the abysmal character of mayors and governors and police chiefs. All these people who, and I've said over and over again that they're not doing their job. So we should, as taxpayers, be able to suspend the payments to police chiefs and police officers, firefighters who are scared to put out fires, mayors, governors, because they're not doing their job. I mean, the country is literally burned to the ground. If we can't, and ironically, because the behavior of a particular police officer who had like 16, 17 incidents before him was never punished by his black police chief, or prosecutors like Amy Klobuchar, the so-called liberal that went on to become a presidential candidate somehow. Because of that, he was still there to do his thing. This is what precipitated all this supposedly police misbehavior, and we were all too well aware of. It happens all too often. Well, at this point, then they should be able to show us what they can do correctly. But instead of doing their job, if they can't stop looting and destruction of property and burning buildings, exactly what are we paying them for? And when they're kneeling down, as they've done way too often, and the National Guard is kneeling down, we've reached a state of lunacy, because all of us have a right to say, okay, we're paying, these are so-called public servants. If the police can't stop something like this, exactly what are they there to do? But most Americans don't realize, and I've written about it, in 1981, the Supreme Court ruled that police officers had no obligation to protect the public. That was 1981. Most people don't know that, and you're seeing that now. They have no obligation to and you see the character, the awful, especially of the leftists, who are like these mayors, these awful mayors of the cities who want to have, and I'm not an anarchist. I understand we have to have some kind of order, but I think this is what they want now. And when you see something like this absurd Hollywood-like with the warlord that looks like he came out of Hollywood Central Casting, I mean, it's hard to take any of this seriously, but the fact that the people that run Seattle, and I quote in that article a ridiculous quote from, I think, the fire chief or something there. It's amazing when you see the just imagine even back in Richard Nixon or even Reagan's day, when not that Republicans, Democrats have ever been that much different from each other, but at that time there would have been some opposition. I don't see any opposition out of Trump's tweets, and his own Secretary of Defense comes out publicly and disagrees with him, unprecedented. So yeah, there's nobody there. That the Republicans are nowhere to be seen. They're apparently just going to let this go for as long as until the protesters get tired. But I've never seen anything like this. This is, we have to ask ourselves, how are we living under tyranny? We're all scurrying around in masks and obeying these social distancing orders when the leaders have all reverted back into the shadows. They're nowhere to be seen. That's thus the Lord of the Flies element. So it is a combination of Lord of the Flies and 1984.
Well, look, I don't want to cast dispersions or ad hominems against these Democrats based on the way they look, but you mentioned Lori Lightfoot, and there's that clip of her pledging allegiance to the New World Order. Her words, not mine. And then the way she's handled this quote-unquote crisis, to me, makes her look quite demonic. She's just an angry, scary woman. Let's contrast that to Jacob Frey in Minneapolis, and let's just talk about the ideology of these people. Because Jacob Frey stood down while the city burned for several nights. Finally, the National Guard came in and regained control instantly. They rolled in at 11:30 at night. By 11:50, all of the rioting and all the crowds were gone. So all it took was a little show of force. A few days later, Jacob Frey is at one of these rallies, surrounded by people, presumably his voters, Democrats, foaming at the mouth Democrats, who ask him on microphone, will you pledge to defund the police? And to his credit, he said, no, I think that would be a mistake. I won't do it. And he was drummed out of the crowd and treated like a piece of trash. The point being, these people, there's no level that you can give these people where they say enough is enough. They will always want more, to the point, in my opinion, where they just want total anarchy. Do they not understand whose interests they serve? And I'm driving at the bankers, George Soros, those who actually do want anarchy and a crisis in this country.
Well, I think some of them are naive and then maybe well-intentioned in their own hearts. But I think obviously the leadership and what's driving this is intentional, much as the response to this absurd virus or whatever it is was intentional as well. This is all planned out, clearly. You go back to October last year when they had a drill about it, and Bill Gates was involved in Agenda 21 or whatever. All this is planned. As FDR said, nothing in politics happens by accident. But what you're seeing here is basically the decades worth of on the cultural ground. Pat Buchanan talked about the cultural war. I believe it was the 1988 Republican convention. Of course, he's been criticized for that. He was spot on, because at that time we were losing the culture war then. And when I say we, I'm nominally on the left, but I also believe in traditional things like there are only two genders. You know, these kind of things but we've lost that. In 1988, we were losing. Clearly, we've completely gone haywire here. When you have people, even I was reading the other day that the Los Angeles Times, a veteran editor there, I think Norman Perlstein or something, is saying the very word looting is racist. They want to tear down, not only tearing down statues of Jefferson and Washington, Christopher Columbus, all of the Confederate generals, so forth, with not anyone protecting them. There's nobody even attempting to stop this. They are now wanting to tear down statues of Mahatma Gandhi, a brown man who fought white colonial rule and who inspired Martin Luther King's civil rights movement with his civil disobedience. And I got in arguments on social media with people who were telling me Gandhi was representative of white supremacy. You can't have a debate at this when you're that insane, and there's no other word for it. You've completely lost all reason, and that's the problem. We have so many of the people on the left that have been triggered by the election of Trump. The Trump derangement syndrome's a real thing, and they are acting as if they're mental patients. Nobody knows what they want. They're like toddlers on steroids or something. You can't pacify them. And you mentioned my book, Bullyocracy. I've obviously written a lot about bullies. The only way, if a bully is bothering you, the only way to stop them at some point is to resist. If the authorities won't correct the behavior, much as in schools they won't correct it and punish bullies who are doing things, the same thing for this. These are basically psychopaths doing the kind of things they're doing. They're not being punished. Hundreds of them were released, have been released so far that were arrested. So there's no repercussions for what they're doing. Apparently they can't be prosecuted at this point. The only way they will ever be stopped, they're not going to stop until they meet some kind of resistance. And so far, they're not meeting any resistance.
It's all very troubling because, what comes to mind is how easy it is to destroy a civilization when dumb people, naive people, are willing to believe what these people are willing to believe. So if we think about class warfare, which is really what this is, I think, Donald, they're injecting race, but really this is about class warfare because so many of these young people destroying cities don't have families, they aren't married, they haven't brought children into the world, they haven't worked careers to buy a home or pay for it. So in their mind, anyone who has more than them is their enemy. And it just makes me laugh because it's the banksters, it's the bankster class, the trillionaire class that is causing this. And it's the bankster class that will get away with it when our cities burn. You write in your article, Donald, and I want folks to just think about this for a second. If this was quote-unquote white supremacists doing this, think of how the media would react. You write, a black warlord dubbing himself as Raz arrived instantly on the scene as if transported there by Hollywood casting. They first named their new republic Chaz, or Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, but are now calling themselves CHOP for Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. The point, and you know it, Don, if it was a white militant group that was angry at the government doing this, oh my God. These mayors would call in the National Guard and put them down like dogs.
Absolutely. And everything that Trump may instinctively want to do here, they would be urging him to do. And if he hesitated for a second, they would go. And this is why, Sean, I end up more and more people saying, you sound like a white nationalist. I don't want to sound like one. I'm a classical liberal. I'm a populist. I'm a civil libertarian. But you have to speak the truth. And right now, you can't have a culture. Basically, what we're looking for here is Black Lives Matter. So there's a lot of whites involved, by the way, in Black Lives Matters, curiously enough. And that's part of the problem, I think. And I wrote an article last year called The Unbearable Whiteness of Being, in which I came out as being white. And I said, I've got, I'm not ashamed to be white, but I'm not proud. I had nothing to do with it. We have to get past this. And so, what is happening now contradicts completely what President Kennedy said when he was pushing the first civil rights law, when he said race has no place in American life or law. And what Martin Luther King said with his dream about his children being judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Both of those statements would be considered white supremacy if someone made them today, including the one by most of what Martin Luther King said. So this is basically, somebody called it the anti-civil rights movement at this point. That's where we're at. And until there's some blowback, I mean, whites are still like 60-some% of the population. We're still the majority here. You would not know it to watch the culture. You would not know that black people are 13% of the population, and that's not a good or bad observation. It's a fact. It is what it is. You can't let really a pretty small portion of the population completely drive the culture, the interest of that population. When you have situations now where universities are seriously saying we need to grade black students easy on a more lenient scale and not give them final exams. And then you had a very liberal professor at UCLA who naturally protested this, who was threatened and put on suspension. So what we have reached at this point, this is affirmative action on steroids. We have to, at some point, we can't go as we did, right from separate but equal in the back of the bus to affirmative action and multitude of civil rights laws and what is clearly black favoritism in the workplace and so forth. There's different standards. We have to treat everyone equally. Their rules, laws, and standards of conduct have to apply equally to everyone, and that includes the wealthy. As you know from my book, Survival of the Richest, I've written about that as well. That's another form of favoritism. Everybody has to be equal. Otherwise, the law means nothing. Rules mean nothing. Standards of conduct mean nothing. Certainly, any white person that's arrested, or anyone outside these, because I mean, some of the people that were arrested were white, obviously, but anyone who is arrested for just simple looting or vandalism at this point, outside of this movement, has every reason to protest and say, what are you targeting me for prosecution for? You let hundreds of people go for doing the same thing. So we have to get a grip on this, and if we're going to not have anarchy, we have to have some kind of order. But right now, outside of a very almost a lame duck Donald Trump, there is no one out there. I don't see anyone in public. None of the Republicans. I mean, the pathetic rhinos like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell, which run the Republican Party, they are as silent about this as the Democrats, and they're all figuratively kneeling before this movement where nobody even knows what they want at this point or when they're going to stop, because no one's making them stop. And if we're going to have any leadership, someone has to step up or do something.
Yeah, we're going to talk about funding in a second. Who's funding these things? And I want to play a soundbite for you, but I keep tweeting, when are we going to arrest Soros? Right? I'm asking the president that. But you said something really important I want to circle back to. And you mentioned that some people are saying you're sounding more like a white nationalist. Isn't it interesting how race has been weaponized? Because they have to insert that color in there, a white nationalist. How about you're just sounding like a nationalist? And a lot of Mexican Americans and a lot of black Americans are proudly nationalists at this point. They want to have borders. They want to have rule of law, not a one-world global government, and that would be nationalism. But they've weaponized it with color now. You're a white nationalist. See, they want you to stand down and shut up, Don.
Absolutely, and that's you can't have. They're always famous for saying we're going to have a dialogue about race or discussion. The dialogue consists of increasingly angry black people saying everything's racist, and maybe a few cucked whites who feel just as strongly that whites are bad as they do. I mean, when you have the amount of white people I've encountered online and seen videos of who talk about white privilege and white supremacy, what does white supremacy even mean? I'm 63 years old. I have never met any white in my life that is a white supremacist. I don't even know what that means. Most whites are scared of blacks at this point, and I've met very few whites that have any privilege. Now, there's wealth privilege, and if they couched it like that, I'd be there right there with them. But they're not. And when you have the richest man, and I point out that in the article, the richest man allegedly in the world, I guess outside of the Rothschilds, Jeff Bezos of Amazon and Washington Post fame, he recently gave $10 million to groups like Black Lives Matters. And I said, if this guy is not a white supremacist, the richest white man in the world, who is? And yet he's giving money to your group. And that's what I point out in that article, is that corporate America, who is run largely by whites, who certainly if there is such a thing as white supremacy, they must have it because they're the richest men in America. They run huge corporations, yet they cater to non-whites, especially blacks. They slap down and fire, and I give examples of that, of white people who just simply gone about, and if you know, as I am, in fact, I talked to Dustin Nemos yesterday, the Stop Digital Bit Burning campaign, these anti-censorship on the internet. But it's not just censorship on the internet, it's censorship within the workplace now, because you have people that are getting fired that simply are critical of Black Lives Matters. Apparently, this is an organization that cannot be criticized at this point. How can you lose your job in a free country? And I understand if you're on the employer's time and you're online and doing it while he's paying you, okay, then he has a point. But if you're on your own time at home and you're going on social media and, people on Twitter, most of Twitter is just stupid, remarks by people. It's just full of stupid junk. If you can't spout off and give your opinion and say, and call looters thugs, which of course is considered racist. I mean, the word looting is considered racist now, we're told. But if you can't do that, then you don't have freedom of speech. And we know the left doesn't believe in freedom of speech anymore. So they want people fired for it, and it's happening. No one is questioning it. Now just imagine if some black employee posted something, bad about, called the stupid white Republican or something. There would be no chance of them being fired, not in a million years. And if they attempted to, they would probably be compensated in some way and get something more out of it. So we have to have a level playing field. We don't have a level playing field. The culture is run 100%. Even Donald Trump, who's called a racist constantly, he's considered the biggest racist in the world. To my knowledge, he has never mentioned he's never talked about white people or whites ever in any of his speeches, and I don't believe he's ever mentioned Black Lives Matter in any of his countless tweets. So, but he's considered racist simply for the most very reasonable things like wanting to control the border and do something about immigration. And that's where we've gone from 1988, where Pat Buchanan talked about the culture war. We've lost totally, because we're at the point now where it's not even a war, because there is no other side at this point. They've won, they've taken over the culture, and at this point, until there's some blowback and some resistance, I don't know what the end game is here. I don't know if they're planning to just burn everything down, and then I don't know what they're going to use to. I mean, let's look at the economic fallout from the draconian lockdown of businesses, which caused who knows how many businesses to fail, how many employees to lose their jobs and never get them again or never make as much money. But look at the damage that's being done. All these buildings have been destroyed. Who's going to pay that? What kind of bailout is going to be needed for that, especially when you have so many people unemployed? Nobody's considering that, and nobody's talking about the same when the anti-lockdown protests happened. The same left was going crazy. Oh my God, we're not safe. It's all gonna come back. And nobody's saying that about it. Apparently the COVID-19 is immune to Black Lives Matters and Antifa protesters.
Yeah, we're going to talk about funding here because it's very important. You say that we've won, there's no resistance. If that's true, it's only because people don't understand what is actually funding this revolution, this war on America. So, a couple of things. President Trump has tweeted, rightly so, we can't change our history, but we can learn from it. And he's referring to the toppling of monuments and the destruction of monuments. Now, I want to do a couple screen shares, and then I'm going to play a soundbite for you about funding. Orwell said the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. That's what's in progress here. Now, the question is, who's funding it? Do you follow George Webb's work at all, Don?
I've heard of him, yes.
All right. NATO's American Gladio. Tell me if you can't hear this right away. Let's listen to some of this, and you can interject at any point. Jump in, and I'll pause the soundbite. But listen to this. NATO's American Gladio.
Okay, it's June 15, 2020. George Webb here on the Diplomatic Back Channel. What's old is new. A lot of talk about Antifa lately, a lot of talk about Black Lives Matter being infiltrated by Antifa, a lot of people drilling down now, a lot of the analysts drilling down, saying, hey, Antifa is really Act Blue. We've heard about this Act Blue before. We've heard about Act Blue back in 2016. What's the connection here? Well, you probably remember me standing in front of their bank, their headquarters bank, Amalgamated Bank, saying, this guy named Keith Mestrick is the same guy who was the head of the SEIU bank. He's the same guy who's behind the DNC funding. There's this other guy named Andy Tobias that's moving money from the state organizations to the federal or federal to the state, depending on how they want to create disruption. You're going to see that that's going to be the funding mechanism when it's all said and done.
I'm going to just pause it there. Could you hear that okay?
Yes, I heard fine.
We could continue, or we could just extrapolate from there, because what occurs to me, and I've been tweeting about this, remember the pallets of bricks showing up in cities all around the country?
Absolutely, yep.
I kept tweeting to the president and to other politicians, follow the money and make arrests. There are threads to follow here, and the threads will always lead back to the funders in the deep state. Now, I don't know about this Act Blue, but this is a fascinating video commentary. I posted it at thephaser.com, and it warrants watching because you can be guaranteed CNN and MSNBC won't ever talk about the funding.
No, and you're right. And there's somebody, I mean, it usually the default thing is just to talk about George Soros, who certainly is powerful, and I'm sure is involved in some way. But yeah, somebody's behind this. I mean, and all of these movements, whether it's the migrant, I've talked about this many times before, that poor migrants in other countries, how are they affording the trip? Let alone, how are they affording to this? Someone is transporting them, obviously. And the same thing here. You've remarked on the piles of bricks that have been, just like the empty hospitals were filmed earlier by citizen journalists. People have been all over that. And even though the censorship is so bad now, still some of these videos are slipping through, at least for a while, on YouTube. Thank goodness. And people like me, or I'm commenting on Facebook all the time. People, can go to my Facebook page. I have these kinds of stories updated every day where I'm just trying to, because people send me so much. They send me so many videos, I can't keep up with them. And thank goodness for that, because I can't find them on, you need deep searches to find these things before YouTube or whatever scrubs them. But the information is out there, and this is not, however you look at it, this is not, no way this is a natural grassroots uprising. But few of them ever are. I mean, few riots ever are, or protests ever are. There may be people that are looking at it that way and have no connections, but you always have, like, I don't know if you've heard this, but there was a video early on, and there was supposedly a white police officer dressed all in black who was the first person in Minneapolis.
Yeah, I saw that.
To break a window, and they supposedly identified the guy.
He's wearing a gas mask.
Yeah, I mean, now, an honest society would immediately, this guy's been identified, they would bring him in for questioning. What are you doing? You're a cop out there. What are you doing breaking a window and starting the looting? Because most people, Sean, are followers. Most people are almost like lemmings.
But we have to include the mainstream media there. Where's the mainstream media on this? Where is the local media in Minneapolis and St. Paul that was outraged while these riots were moving into a third night, asking the governor to come on television at 10:30 at night and explain himself, begging him to explain, where is the National Guard? We're told the National Guard is on the ground. We're seeing no evidence of the National Guard. They finally moved in at 11:30 at night, and this whole thing ended in 20 minutes. So where's the mainstream media on that guy? Supposedly a cop, dressed head to toe in black, covering his face and identity with a gas mask, breaking windows at an AutoZone. I can figure this out and you can figure it out, but they can't? They're not willing to ask the questions, or are they not permitted to ask those questions?
Well, they're not permitted, and certainly just going back in my years for the JFK assassination and other things I've investigated, I've written so much about the media, and that is the saddest aspect of all this, and the reason why it will be so difficult to overthrow this tyranny. Just one honest television network would do it. I mean, the internet does what it does, and shows like yours are great. Blogs, out there, people like me and so many others that write, they do get alternative information out there, but we don't have the platforms that a national television network would have, or a big Hollywood movie would have, or even a huge rap record or something would have. If we could have people putting out that information, that's why Oliver Stone's JFK was so huge. It was the only time Hollywood has ever really approached any of these subjects. It's similar if Oliver Stone or someone made a movie about 9/11 or any of this stuff, it would have the same kind of impact. But as you indicated, even at the local level, and I know this for myself, I was fired a couple of years ago from my IT job for helping a handicapped employee, and a long story, but it was tremendously unfair, and I think my politics probably had something to do with it as well. But I live in a right to work state, which means there's a right to fire for any reason. I could do nothing about it. And I went to the local media, some of whom I know. And even on a subject like that, which would be a good story about a handicapped guy, that couldn't walk, and we were just trying to help him, and we did nothing wrong at all. They were not interested, because the organization that fired me is the largest healthcare institution on the East Coast. They do lots of advertising, so they were scared. And so if they're scared of a story like that, imagine something like this. Because even if you have a Lois Lane-like reporter, and they may exist, I don't know, but I think most of them know instinctively, once they get through journalism school and all the brainwashing, and they get to that point, they kind of know, well, they kind of roll their eyes at anything that looks conspiratorial, anything that goes outside the narrative. They just simply regurgitate, much as has happened since at least the days of the JFK assassination.
Well, can I interrupt and just say you're spot on, because JFK himself did a speech to these people, and he said, we stand opposed to secret societies and secret oaths, and there is a power that uses covert means to its ends. And these people in the media know that. And what kills me about all this is that when people like me start to build channels and gain traction, I mean, I was on track to hit 1 million subscribers this year. They changed their algorithms in January of 2019, and since then I've added maybe 50,000 subscribers. My videos are only seen by 10 or 15% of my entire audience because notifications don't go out to all 600,000 subscribers. So they changed the rules and they stack the deck to keep their narratives alive. It is just so nefarious and so maddening, Don, because so many of us are active, we are vocal, we want to take our country back, but we just don't have a fair shake. I mean, all we have are these elections, and that's it.
Or, I don't have any trust in them. Who knows what's going to happen in November? Because whatever happens, if Trump is reelected, the country's going to go crazy. And if he is defeated, the country's going to go crazy. Or at least I don't think it'll go as crazy because unfortunately our side still has some civility. And that's maybe the problem is that we need to be just as out there as they are, because that side is organized. They're well funded, as you said. We don't have the funding on this side. If it was channels like yours, if you were preaching the opposite thing, they probably would have taken the great core audience you've built and amplified that by millions by injecting a bunch of funds in it.
That's what I said that to my wife. I've said the same thing. I said, do you think I would have any problems with YouTube if this was a pro-abortion channel, if this was a pro-Democrat channel, an open borders channel, if I interviewed people that were associates of some of these, George Soros, for instance? Maybe I could get somebody on from his team over at Media Matters. Do you think I would have any problems on YouTube? So this has become a fascist dictatorship in this country run by these deep state powers that use covert means to their ends. And those of us that can see it are enraged, but we don't fight dirty. We don't burn down cities. We respect the rule of law and decency. We love humanity. See, so we don't fight dirty. I've said this 1 million times, Don. That's the problem. That's why we're a little bit behind the 8 ball here, because they're willing to burn down cities and hurt people. They're willing to use covert means. They're willing to fight dirty and break the law. We're decent human beings who just want to be left alone with our God-given rights. And that's the problem. Right there at the core is the problem. We don't want to take to the streets. We don't want to take to the streets and be armed and threaten anybody. We want to live in peace with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which these people seem hell-bent on destroying.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also, I think, have principles, which the other side might not have. I mean, for instance, I know that if I wanted to write a book tomorrow and just try to prove that Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK, I could get probably the biggest publisher in the world, and I would get a huge advance, even though I wouldn't sell as many books as even Hidden History did, because people aren't going to buy it. But it doesn't matter. They give authors like that who postulate those things, and they've done it a few times in the past. The late Vincent Bugliosi got a lot of money for a book that sold nothing, Reclaiming History.
I remember
it's happened.
That. I remember that. You want to hear something funny? Real an aside? When I worked at Target, I directed commercials. I was a creative director at Target, worked with Tiger Woods, was there for 10 years, loved my job. And the commercials I made were in service of the community because Target gave 5% back of its pre-tax profits to communities in which it did business. They don't do that anymore. I worked with a guy there named Seth, and he's the nephew of Bob Dylan. He mentioned that Bugliosi book because he knew my politics, and he knew, I was speaking out vocally about 9/11 in the workplace. That was not smart. False flag terror, I was waking up, informing my friends in the workplace. I'd been there a long time, had very good friends I played poker with, informing these guys, check out Building 7, guys, this does not add up. Check out the BBC reporting early about the collapse of World Trade Center 7. That doesn't add up, but I was constantly hit with cognitive dissonance back saying, well, how do you know that? That's green screen. There's no way that BBC thing is real, because if it was real, the mainstream media, the media would be reporting on it, and this would be a huge global story. So I couldn't wake these guys up. But anyway, Seth told me that the JFK assassination was done by Lee Harvey Oswald, and he cited that damn book as his proof. And it just kills me, because I've often said, Don, you cannot wake people up. You can't force them to wake up. They have to choose to wake up on their own. They have to go down these rabbit holes and do their own research, because I swear you can't wake people up. You can't force them to wake up.
No, you can. I get emails and messages from people. There's a young high school kid that emails me all the time now, and he's asking me like how to deal with this family and all this stuff. I said, look, I've been doing this for decades, and I have a huge family, and the only person I've ever woken up is my son. My son is awake. No one else is. My daughter's not. My wife isn't. Nobody else. So like tons of cousins, nephews, and nothing. And they literally ignore my books. But basically everything I hear is from people, strangers or whatever. But you mentioned Dylan's nephew, and I don't know if you saw this week, just again indicating how they cover up the past and the present with the court historians and the so-called journalists. Dylan was interviewed about his recent song, his great song about the
Yeah.
murder most foul, and by Douglas Brinkley, who is probably the dean of the court historians. And all you need to know about how he looks at history is the fact that he is CNN's official historian. So you can imagine his take on anything. He obviously promotes the biggest fairy tales possible. He interviews Dylan about this song and never asked him in detail about some of the lyrics. For Dylan, unlike his nephew, obviously, which is I've always loved Dylan, so I always knew he had to, understand this. But why waited so long, I don't know. But clearly, Dylan, the Murder Most Foul is a pro-conspiracy song. Dylan understood that Lee Harvey Oswald didn't do it. But Douglas Brinkley never asked him about that. I mean, you're talking to a guy about the song, about that subject, and you somehow dance around that. That's the media right there. They literally have it right before them. They won't do it because they don't want someone as respected as Bob Dylan is pontificating on television about how the single bullet theory was impossible or something like that. So they control and people not all of the journalists are like that. The ones I've dealt with at the local level are just, they're making six figures. They have a nice job. Their kids are set. They don't want to upset the apple cart. And again, it's a lack of principles. But you mentioned, ranting in the workplace. That's what I did for a long time. And I wonder today if I was still in the workplace, because I'd be talking about this stuff going on right now. The climate has changed even in 2 years. I mean, I don't think I would survive, and they would be scrutinizing my social media posts a lot more as well.
Right.
I probably would have been fired for something, all the stuff I've written since for COVID and now the protest alone. And so we just, in 2 years, that's, these things happen incrementally, and we don't even realize how much the situation's changed from even a couple of years ago. And I don't know what the answer is, Sean, because really the only person we have on our side in the public eye is Trump. And he is absolutely by himself, and he's been rendered largely ineffective because his own team that he unwisely assembled from deep state insiders, instead of putting outsiders in, if he had a good coterie of outsiders in there, people like Roger Stone and Paul Craig Roberts and Pat Buchanan, Ron Paul or Rand Paul, if he had that kind of core group around him, an Irish mafia like JFK had, he would be insulated somewhat because he wouldn't be a one man against the mob. And that's what he is now. But that's all we have. We don't have anybody else. The media we have on our side are shows like yours that we have to hope to get out to as many people as possible. But I don't.
Tucker Carlson, I suppose, but look what's happening to him. He's being targeted, and his advertisers are being basically threatened and leaving him in droves because the mob mentality can easily be turned around anybody that won't fall in line. And that's what really makes me irate about all of this, is that it's this mob mentality. And I keep hearing all of these idiot pundits talk about our democracy. My God, it's not a democracy, it's a republic. And they know it, but they keep using that damn word democracy. It's so maddening. And I live in a state where this idiot governor on the back of COVID took a $1.3 billion surplus and turned it into a $2.4 billion deficit on the back of this lockdown. And now they're talking about a second wave coming. And just last night on the news, they broke down the numbers. By their count, 1,300, slightly more, 1,312, something like that, 1,300 dead that they attribute to COVID. 1,000 of those people were in long-term health care facilities. So they were old people with pre-existing conditions. This is madness. So they destroyed this economy on 1,300 probably falsely labeled deaths, only 300 of which were people not in long-term health care facilities. It's madness, and it makes you believe these governors are in on whatever this plot is, Donald.
Right.
It really does.
And the job of trying to overthrow this tyranny is so. To even look at it, it just makes your head swim, because we see exactly how many good governors there are out there. I guess the one was at North Dakota or South Dakota, the female governor there said some good things.
Yeah.
There may be a handful. I don't know how many mayors they are. I mean, they all just appear horrible. How many police chiefs? They all seem to be capitulating to this. How many fire chiefs who are, when writing Bullyocracy, I'm familiar with the quality or lack thereov of superintendents, school board presidents, things like that. at every level. It's so bad, Sean, that there are honest people at every level, but the problem is they're so outnumbered. So it takes so much guts. Let's say, you're in, if you're in someone today that was in the House, or especially the House, but that would have the guts to get up on the floor and call Black Lives Matters and Antifa what they are, and say, this is ridiculous. We can't capitulate to them. You can't have a group that is above criticism. This is ridiculous. We still criticize. I mean, people can say what they want about Jesus Christ, which offends, millions of people who are religious. But we can't say something about Black Lives Matters or you lose your job. I mean, this is insane. We have to, but until white people especially, again, I'm not a white nationalist, but you have to say it because they're the people that have to stand up and get a backbone. They have to stop kneeling before people. Until the central issue here, Sean, is that this is all about trying to extort money from people who did nothing wrong and are responsible for nothing that happened to people who are not alive today. Mm-hmm. And this is the central issue. They're trying to extort money for whatever reason. I mean, that's I don't know what I think the people above them that are orchestrating this and paying for this. It's just more divide and conquer, and they know this racial divide works best for them, and so that's why they continue to go back to it. And despite the fact that more and more white people out there clearly are sick of this, I don't see it showing up anywhere. I see people kneeling down. I see white officials apologizing for nothing and then still getting fired. I mean, how many times does this have to happen? And that was Trump's great appeal. But it has not that the fact that he appeared to be the first white alpha male figure to appear in quite some time that didn't automatically apologize, especially because if he apologized for everything he's criticized for, it's literally all he'd do. Right. But I mean, he doesn't do that. And that is a quality that I think a lot of whites especially admire because they're so used to seeing public figures capitulating and issuing an act of contrition, and that never does any good because they still get fired. So I don't know how they don't learn from the past and realize this is not only kind of a sickening move, and it makes you look weak, and no one respects weakness. But it's not principle, because clearly you said what you said, and that's what your beliefs are. Stand up for your beliefs, defend them, instead of getting. I understand maybe if you're trying to save your job, but it doesn't save your job. You're still fired. Right. So that's what we need to fight, and I think there needs to be a huge class action lawsuit for all those people who were fired for expressing themselves on social media, and that probably will never happen. And of course, they may end up in the courtroom like Roger Stone did, one of the many politicized courtrooms where you're coming in with a case like that, you have absolutely no chance at justice because the judge is so prejudiced against you to begin with. She's not going to be unbiased. So there's so many problems. I don't know what the answer is. All I can do is just kind of speak truth to power and try to, say what I say and hope that it gets out there to as many people as possible. And that's why I'm grateful for forums like this, because you have a huge audience and they're
I had a huge audience. I mean, honestly, we'll have to see how this one does, Donald. But where previously maybe this would get between 100 and 150,000 views.
Yes, I remember.
I doubt it'll break 60,000. It might only do 40,000. The numbers continue to fall, which of course makes me demoralized, and it makes me feel like I'm not doing a good enough job that's resonating with the people. But in truth, I think that's what YouTube wants me to feel like, because they want me to shut up and go away. Yeah. Now, as we round out this conversation, I want to provide some evidence that I think is pretty quantifiable that there is something much more deeper. There's something much deeper and more nefarious going on here behind the scenes. And it's not about skin color. Okay, this is not black versus white. This is freedom versus fascism. Let me do a screen share for you. And before I do the screen share, you've heard Henry Kissinger talk about a new world order many times, have you not?
Oh, yes.
Okay. You've heard about Bush Sr. before his demise, even as president, talking about a new world order many times, have you not?
Yes.
Okay. So the new world order is their words, right? It's not our words. I didn't come up with that, right? Okay. So is the new world order a conspiracy theory? Let's save your response until you see this. I mentioned it earlier, but let's just hear it in her own mouth. I'm not sure which clip to hit here. We'll try this one.
So you got to eliminate that compliance, and you make it a mandate. And then you do training particularly in the city, I'll call them licensing departments, whether it's zoning, buildings, housing will be impacted by it, planning certainly, and you pick the people to run those agencies and the deputies that are pledging allegiance to the New World Order and good governance.
Okay. I have to pause it there. I don't have the full picture or context of what this conversation was about, but you can take away, as I can, the fact that she wants to put into positions of power those that have, in her words, pledged allegiance to the New World Order and governance, good governance. That's global governance, Don. That's United Nations top-down stuff.
Yeah, I tabulated the list of, it was in Hidden History and Crimes and Cover-Ups, both. I think I put both of those books. I had all the examples of people from the past, leaders, political leaders that talked about the New World Order. It wasn't just George H.W. Bush, who kind of become renowned for it, I guess, in '89 or whatever it was. But clearly, this is something they've talked about for a very long time. And this may be, we can't, even us so-called conspiracy theorists who study this stuff for a living and pay so much attention to it, didn't really see what has come so far in 2020. We really didn't see all this coming, especially so quickly, and one on top of the other. So, but we think the end result may be a collapse, because it looks like they're just going to let everything collapse. And if that happens, then of course what will be necessary, they may have to step in. Well, the only thing that can save us, because of course the world has been devastated by this alleged virus. So the only thing that could save us is a world government. We have to all join together. What is this? We're all in this together was the original COVID thing. They may use that to do this. And at this point, I don't have much confidence. I would think that probably the breakdown on those supporting a world government would be akin to the breakdown on Trump, because that's how the virus ended up breaking down. They politicized it and made it about Trump. So then I suddenly realized that everybody I'm arguing with hates Trump. Somehow he's a part of this virus. And that's how everything breaks down against his personality, which I think is by design. And I think any kind of movement for world government would be with the people that still remain loyal to Trump, or someone like me, or the few of us that are out there that are kind of independent and looking at this, trying to think reasonably and not with emotion, would be very dubious of this and realize what a bad thing world government would be. As I tell people, try to just go and talk to your local school superintendent. Call up your local congressional representative and see how impossible it is to get him on the phone. Mm-hmm. What do you think you're going to be if you're world representative, who's I guess representing millions of people or something? Imagine what kind of representation. We don't get any representation now. Imagine what kind of representation you get there. I mean, obviously that best, as Jefferson, a classical liberal like me, said, my hero, that government is best which governs the least. And what we're seeing, we have the worst of both worlds, because we have this gargantuan government. It's totally ineffective. It's a huge bureaucracy, where one thing I've written about recently is FEMA. Here you have an agency that was created, Federal Emergency Management Agency. Now, we saw on the few times it's been deployed, as in Katrina, how worthless they are. But no one's even talked about deploying FEMA. This is not an emergency, if ever there was one. They've done nothing.
You know what, though, sorry to interrupt. I think what they're going to call for, and again, let's call back to that Lori Lightfoot clip, where she now openly, sitting in office as the Chicago mayor, is talking about the need for putting people into positions of power that have pledged their allegiance to a new world order. This is inconceivable a decade ago or two, in my opinion. I've never seen a mayor of a major American city openly saying we need to pledge allegiance to a new world order, which is global governance. I think what these people in these states are going to call for, look, they've turned Seattle over to a warlord.
Yep.
When they need help, they're going to ask for the United Nations troops. They're going to
try
to sell that to the American people, Don.
Yes, I was
absolute treachery.
Yeah, there have already been inferences about that we need to bring the UN in, and it's amazing. We have the biggest military the world has ever seen. We have a huge military-industrial complex, and yet somehow this authority, which has tyrannized us and taken away all our civil liberties, is helpless in the face of street protests. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And you and I know if these were genuine protests that were, even if they were Occupy protests that were coordinated against the 1%, because there were tons of arrests when the Occupy protests, even though they were kind of loosely organized, and most of them didn't even know why they were there. But if they're coming after a real, like if patriots were protesting in the same numbers, and talking about tyranny and, we need to reread the Declaration of Independence and understand what the First Amendment really means, you can guarantee that those police forces will be out in full force and that the National Guard would be deployed, the Marines would be deployed, they'd be droning us. None of that is happening. They have all the power to do all of that. They've deployed it on innocent civilians many times in the past, far too often. They're sitting and doing nothing. And that's why I say, we have the worst of both worlds, because we have tyranny in terms of our rights being taken away from us. Now we can't go, in my state of Virginia, you can't go anywhere without a ridiculous mask on inside any building. And I know other states are like that as well. So we're obeying this kind of tyranny, and we're allowing it for no reason at all. There's no science behind this. It's absurd. But at the same time, the same officials, the same cops that will hide behind a bush and try to, because it's policing for profit, it's all about getting revenue for the state, they'll try to arrest you for making a legal U-turn, but they can't go out and stop violent protesters. The ones that are violent need to be stopped, because the First Amendment, we're guaranteed the right to peaceably assemble and peaceably protest. Well, when you're not peaceably doing it, when you're breaking windows, destroying property, setting fires,
Right.
That's not a constitutional right. But I don't see who's stopping it. And so the same authorities that are overstepping their bounds constantly on peaceful citizens are doing nothing to stop this and to restore some kind of order.
Well, I have to believe these Democrat mayors and governors are going to be tossed out of office, if not impeached or recalled, just voted out in their next election cycle, because even Democrats have to be waking up to this. I mean, if you live in Seattle, you have to be horrified by this. And again, look at Minneapolis. As much as I don't like Jacob Frey, eventually the National Guard was called in, and it all ended pretty quickly. You know, we have posse comitatus for a reason. We don't want the U.S. military in the streets. We don't need them in the streets. But the National Guard, on occasions where it's necessary to prevent businesses from being looted and burned down, I think, in my opinion, that makes some sense, and it worked in Minneapolis. Don, I want to thank you so much for your time. You've been a longtime friend to SGT Report. Do you want to tell people how they can find you directly?
Yeah, well, my blog where you can find the latest article is donaldjeffries.wordpress.com, keeping it unreal. And I'm trying to get more active on Twitter, so if you can put my Twitter link up, I'll send it to you. I'd really appreciate it. It's at Don Jeffries at Twitter. I need a lot more followers there. I also, as people keep reminding me, well, you need to tweet more. That's true. I spend so much time on Facebook. But my newest book that I'm promoting a lot is Bullyocracy, as you mentioned, how the social hierarchy enables bullies to rule schools, workplaces, and society at large. And we're certainly seeing enough bullies, enough psychopathic behavior out there now to understand that we've put the wrong people in charge. So I think it's a relevant book. My other book, Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776-1963, forward by the great Ron Paul, one of the few great principled leaders left in our civilization, is still relatively new, and I think you'll learn a lot from reading that, because it does, history repeats itself, and we're not learning from it. And Survival of the Richest, which is the little engine that could, I wish more people had looked at how the corruption of the marketplace and the disparity of wealth created the greatest conspiracy of all, is out now with a new forward by one of the great liberals left, Naomi Wolf. And I think people read that and understand that where a lot of these problems began, which is in this rigged system that Donald Trump talks so much about during his campaign. The system is rigged, and I think a lot of the people that are out there honestly in this protest feel frustrated because they don't have a chance. And that was before the system was locked down, which made the odds even greater against the average person being able to succeed in a marketplace where so many businesses have been lost to this senseless shutdown.
You know, I don't know if you knew this, but if you look back at my first 2 or 3 videos on YouTube, the first ones I ever made, it would have been around 2009, 2010. I have sound bites in those videos from Naomi Wolf and Paul Craig Roberts, and from Naomi specifically talking about a warning to patriots in her book, 10 concrete quantifiables that prove we are falling into tyranny. And Naomi Wolf, interesting. All right, well, my friend, thank you so much for joining us. Guys, our guest has been Donald Jeffries. Thanks, Don.
Thanks so much, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. For real news 24/7, please just visit us directly at sgtreport.com. When you do that, my newest 3 videos are always sticky posted at the very top of SGT Report, so you can find them there. Guys, thanks so much. A special thanks to our patrons. God bless you guys. Bye-bye.
Looks to me like we got trillions that go as banker welfare, while we've got thousands that go to households. It's mollify the public with thousands because they're going to send trillions to save our nation with the big banks.